Okay, so welcome back. I hope you all had a lovely lunch. We're going to be going into our afternoon keynote session today. I feel like I've been throwing out the superlatives all throughout the day, but Naeema is a really innovative person within our sector. I've known her for a number of years and she's always done awesome work, but she's going to be sharing with us her really important work on the equity effect. So I could throw out loads of superlatives. I'm actually working on a review project with her team at Henley Business School at the moment. So a couple of terms that have come up a lot in my consultancy sessions with members of her team are things like visionary, inspirational leader, and she's doing really important work. So we're really excited to have her here. She's not just director of the careers services at Henley Business School, she's also head of EDI there as well. So a very busy woman. So we really appreciate your time today, Naeema. So I'm going to hand over now, and please chuck your questions into the chat, and we'll hopefully allow a bit of time at the end for Naeema to answer any questions that you have. Thanks very much.
Mike, thank you so much. That's such a nice introduction, and it's so nice to be working with you. The work that you do, and Rebecca, is incredible. I think the work of Handshake as well. Really, I've been here all morning. I'm here all day, folks, and I really enjoyed the conversations. And I hope some of the things I'll be talking about today will kind of link up to what what we've discussed or what's been discussed this morning, and I'll be talking about the equity effect. So I'll make a start, but I just want to say hello also to all my careers buddies that I've not seen for ages since the lockdown, and all the people working in recruitment and all the people working in universities and business schools. It's so nice to be back, isn't it? Now, I've not done a Zoom for quite a while, so because I've been doing this whole IRL thing, so let's see if I can get back into Zooming. Shall we do the immortal? Can you see the slides? I'm hoping for a quick wave from Mike to say that the slides are up. And
yeah, all good, Naeema, all good.
Thank you. Brilliant. Okay, so as I say, I'm going to be talking about the equity effect. It's something I'm really proud to have been able to be the lead researcher on. My career from being in careers and heading up careers is sort of expanded, and I don't think it's any different to what all of us are doing in this space around people, professional development of students, graduates, and us in the workplace. So I think what I'm looking at when I look at careers, we're looking at skilling, we're looking at professional development, and that has to include a nod towards equity. It really does, and perhaps now more than a nod. And it also has to look at the other area of work that I do, is look at the impact of AI and other things, and that's what my research has been in as well. So super proud to be able to share it, and super proud to be able to share this piece of research that I did. And what we looked at was the equity effect and actually the hidden unfairness of equality. And what I'm going to talk about is how equity is probably the thing that we need to talk a lot. I've got a massive deck I've written for today. So what I will do is go through most of those slides, but I will give Mike these slides and he can share them with you. So if you want more stats and the data coming out, you can have a little bit more about it. And Mike, if I might also at the end invite you to include in the chat the equity effect report, which is available on Henley Business School. If you just Google it, equity effect Henley Business School, you'll find it. Okay, so let me go through what I want to talk about. The equity effect, the report that we did at Henley Business School, looking at discrimination in the workplace. And obviously we know there's a whole range of things that people will be discriminated on, from the age, language, gender, the educational background, obviously social mobility. But the equity effect actually focuses on one particular area, and that's around race. And the reason I'm going to talk mainly about race, and the reason I talk mainly about race is what I do is start looking at the data. So if I look at some of the data, it's probably one of the most impactful areas that we need to look at in terms of recruitment and people development. Sheer numbers would tell us that. Because I'm going to go through some of the stats to give us a sort of an experience of some of the things around race. So as a Black person, people will experience everyday acts of racism from Prime Minister or people in senior places talking about race in a particular way. We even had most recently the Prime Minister talking and other parts of the government talking about being too Muslim when Nusrat Ghani was asked to step down, more likely to be stopped and searched, 3 times more likely to be arrested, and so on and so forth. So there's a whole range of things there. But what about the experience? And when we talk about our experience of students and so on, we're listening to a bit earlier what it's like to have experience and go in, perhaps looking different into the workplace, you know, having to get rid of the tattoos and so on that was discussed earlier. But there's other things obviously around race that happens. And if we think about what happens in race, this is from YouGov, racism in the workplace and on the street. None of our students, our colleagues will just experience race in the workplace. It's this whole experience around people from Black and ethnic minority groups. So you'll see, for example, the difference there with Chinese and Indian people perhaps being in the workplace less, often thought of as the model minority, often called, you know, hardworking, getting on with things, but on the street getting a lot more abuse. Black people getting the same amount of abuse that they get on the street and in the workplace. What about at the sports when they head off to going to watch a match? The data from Sky Sports, witnessing racism, frequently experienced racism, and actually you can see the difference that, you know, it's quite high. So sports is something, obviously we've got the take the knee thing that came in from the States, but how that's still influencing people's experience of race and racism at the at sports. Just to pause for a second, I'm not going to look at the chat, so I'm going to ask Mike to sort of gather all the chat at the end, only because I found when, you know, I'm sure you do, you know, looking at the chat and you get a bit, right, what am I going to say next? So I'm not going to look at the chat until later, and if you scare me with what you said, I'll be really worried. What about our students? Now, this was taken back in 2014-15, looking at the difference between attainment gaps, and many of you in universities will be working on this now, looking at the difference between attainment gaps between white and Black students, with 26.3% here. What we can see now, even today, is that there's huge difference between how it's actually the biggest difference. We looked at gender. If you look at most universities looking at gender, looking at disability and other areas of discrimination, all equally important to address. But what we find in the university sector is that Black students consistently and broadly, people from Black and ethnic minority students score less. And that's looking at government data, looking at home students in particular. What about the staff? We see that Black scientists are less likely to hold a professor post. You see that, of course, there are fewer Black people in society, but even taking that into account, we see there are fewer people from Black backgrounds who are holding up scientist posts. In fact, overall, there's only 1% of Black people who are professors in the workplace. And actually, is that a surprise when we look at what actually happens? Black students are more likely to drop out of studying science as well. Now, this is data. This is not giving us information as to why. We have to start as professionals making inferences around this and looking deeper and analysing what's going on. More data. This is US data. This is what McKinsey show us, that there's only 4 Black CEOs in the FTSE, sorry, not as is the FTSE, there's the top companies, I feel what they call, but there's only 4 CEOs there. And actually, I don't know if you want to have a guess, or we'll have a look at the chat now. Have a guess how many Black chief execs there are in the workplace. How many, just want you to guess, how many Black CEOs are in the FTSE 100? Let's see what we've got. 6, 1, oh, sorry, 2, 3, Jane's saying 3, yeah, 4 there from Uma. Kulvinda says 2. Hi, Kulvinda. Charlotte, yes. Catherine, stop the press. There are none. There are no Black CEOs. There are no Black CFOs. There are no Black chairs in the current FTSE 100. So we are in a position of change. And actually, this intersects, we know, us working in this space, this is an intersection between social mobility, gender, and a whole bunch of things. If we look at even social mobility, we can see, and you will know this, but let's put this in, the UK top jobs are still dominated by privately educated. If you imagine senior judges 65%, when only 7% go to independent schools. So if we're still recruiting in a particular way through legal and the bar, there are a lot of changes that we see at the moment. Hopefully this will change, but it really is going to change against a tide of things that are particularly away. We look at journalism, right down the bottom is journalism and media, still highly dominated, and that's an influence on all of us. And we also see cricket players as well. Some of you may have followed the recent experience of Azim Rafiq, Yorkshire Cricket, who had told they were institutionally racist, because often cricket players coming from South Asian backgrounds are quite keen on playing cricket, but there's a thread that's going against, often because recruitment is still happening at independent schools. In other areas as well, we see a health disparity as well. ONS data showed that Black men were 4.2 times more likely to die from coronavirus than white counterparts. Again, this is just data, but maybe there's some good news here. What we see is Chinese people increasingly earn more than other groups, Chinese and Indian, and this comes through on our graduate data as well. This is FT data from back in 2018, but I had a look at the more recent data, and it's absolutely right that Chinese and Indian students are earning more, going into professions where there's higher earning, and you think, well, maybe there's something there. But then I started having a little bit more, looking at, for example, those that went into, this is 2017, but I looked at the latest data as well, absolutely the same, is that when you start off, these Chinese and Indian graduates, perhaps other people from other minorities go into highly paid work, high professional work, perhaps the percentage of pay gap right at the beginning isn't particularly different. But then we see that grows as people start moving up into an organization. And we see this in most organizations. If we start looking at not just gender pay gap, but we look at race pay gap, we can see a differential growing. And if we look at universities as well, we see a very, very high differential. Okay, so what I did was lead a piece of research published on the 7th of June last year, coming up to a year now of this, where we looked at new research into race equity in UK businesses. And as Mike said in his introduction, was to look at what happened in UK businesses to see if we can adapt that to UK businesses in terms of graduate recruiters, but also into our work in universities and business schools. Our aim here was to understand the reasons race inequity still exists in British workplaces and the barriers and challenges to overcome that. And I'm going to go through a number of slides and details on that. But I want to perhaps go through some of these slides quickly and then give you the set later, so we get a chance to have some conversation as well. I want to give you the headline. I was going to give you, this is what I changed today actually, I was going to give you the kind of like the build up, that I thought, no, I'll just whack you with the main finding. So the main finding is that those organizations that actively confronted racism with practical measures could expect to see an improvement in their employee job satisfaction, loyalty, creativity, and ultimately value, and recording a revenue of 58% higher than those that did not. This is a correlation study. Obviously, there'll be other factors in it, but we've taken over 3 years, the data, and we took out coronavirus and we took out outliers as well. So we still found those organizations that invested had an increase of 58%. Now this, if we look at the literature, this is what all the literature says. In fact, this is no different to McKinsey's work, other people's work on this. A lot of literature says those organizations that do this will find this result. And what they were investing in particular, which I talked about the difference between equality and equity, was looking at equity measures, not just equality. Equality might be the kind of thing, you're running a supermarket and you think everybody should have access to parking, and that's equality. Everybody pile in, get in, you can get out of the car, get out your car if you're coming in by car, and look and get your shopping and load it out. What we have in the UK now is an equity approach where if you have, where supermarkets on the whole consider those people with mobility, younger children, can have access to parking, which is nearer. So by the time those people, giving them a more equitable chance of an equal chance of getting into a shopping centre and being able to do their shopping equally rather than having to struggle from parking at the back. So that's the difference between equality and equity. So it isn't. So sometimes if you have an equality strategy, you could be letting people down because you're supporting systems that are currently not helping. It's the supermarket analogy. I want to also share with you some of the data that came through. from the research, and what we found is 1 in 3 business, and still 30% of business leaders and 24% employees found that race inequity exists in their workplace. So if race inequity is still existing, and this is from our data, around between 30 and 24%, you can imagine the impact of reducing the 58% of revenue. Because what we found also, and this is why the data around race is particularly important, I think, we found that 22% of employees said they personally experienced or seen discrimination, and the many citing race as the primary pretext. That's over half. So race is, unsurprisingly, considering the volume of people that we have in the world, race is a major pretext. So it went out, as Mike said at the beginning, we got a good bit of publicity on it. So people management picking it up, talking about businesses that target ethnic minority support, see nearly 60%, they rounded it up, which is very kind of them, from Henley Business School researchers down there. I was super chuffed to see that Andrew Bailey, the governor of the Bank of England, took the report and said, a screenshot this morning so you can see the article's 9 months old, but I've still kept it as posterity. I'm going to make the Bank of England better by improving race diversity, and they've got an impressive strategy on that. And he cites in this report the equity effect. And the Voice newspaper, which is the oldest and actually the first, I think, newspaper for Black people in the UK, looking at a whole range of social and business issues, found another really important piece of the research that we found was the most disruptive workers, the most discriminated workers are Black women, age 45, and actually it wasn't local councils, they pulled that out, but it was public sector, and that would include university as well. So older Black women are the most discriminated. So we see the intersectionality of these findings coming through. Okay, so what are we going to do? Many employers start saying, let's start moving ahead and start seeing what we can do and how we can put racism into anti-racism practice into what we want to do and start building what we need to work on. What kind of things do we need to do? I really want to say, I think this is my kind of approach. The 58%, which I'm going to keep throwing up all the time, the 58% is the argument I like to use, because it really is a strong argument of moving into better workplaces, because we know, we heard a lot earlier from the talks how the world of work is changing, the kind of things that we're expecting. This is a slide from a colleague of mine, I'm not going who talks about what's happening with talent. Down there you can pick up different things. There's political changes, there's hybrid working, there's personal brand equity, in the sense that our graduates are thinking, who are they, how do they start coming into the workplace, and lower barriers to moving employers, the loyalty changing as well, particularly as the impact from the pandemic has come forward. So there's changes that are going on. So equity, I would argue, has such a strong place in the workplace. The other reason I think is that some of you may be familiar with ESG, the movement in sort of investment, environmental, social and corporate governance, where people are looking at environmental, climate change, sustainability, social factors, where we have equality and equity, human rights, and governance on corruption, also looking at diversity inclusion. So organizations looking at the 58% where you get better revenue are investing, and we see that high levels of investment, Bain saying most public top quartile ESG companies outperform their industries. It's interesting data for those of you more familiar with finance data. It's interesting, complex, but certainly there's a strong sense that 58% is important. The reason shouldn't be surprised. We also, when we feel that we're part of an inclusion, we thrive and we feel included. All of us do. And the data shows that we're more like 83% of us are more like to stay, 92% more proudly to talk about an organization, 81% improved in performance, etc., etc. So it shouldn't make any surprise why the equity effect gives us the 58%, because if we feel included, we are going to feel we can contribute. We're free to be creative. We're free to innovate. Our productivity will go up. Our contribution to the organization will go up. There's no wonder that we get a 58% increase in revenue. This is also the same for gender, but the research that's done by many organizations, we didn't put this in our data, but shows that when you look at gender, all the things around women in leadership, that increases revenue and value about 26%, but race about 39%, according to Bain. So ours is higher, but we find that most research shows that equity on race, because it also pulls up other ways of thinking. It pulls up critical ways of moving forward with an organization and how we progress. I want to just give you a model that I'm using at the moment, is that when we look at race equity, of course, especially for those coming from a social justice perspective, might focus a lot on the moral imperative or the ethical imperative. There's those of us think, well, it's employment law, there's the legal imperative that's important. I'm including in here why I think it's important when we work to improve this, that the business imperative is equal as well. So all four of these areas are important. And yet we know this, and yet here we are and still facing a lot of these problems. And I'm very happy for you to start writing some of that in the chat that Mike might be able to pick up your thoughts about race equity in our own workplaces, in universities, business schools, colleges, corporate places, recruitment, and how we feel about that. Because what we also found in the equity effect is that when people saying it's a real challenge, is that business leaders we found were actually did not feel, whilst they know it's important, didn't put it, when we looked at that, we offer them a series of challenges that they need to look at. They rated it least important over the 12 months to look at race equity. And only 7% actually said it was a primary challenge to overcome. It's the bottom of the list, despite the kind of thing that we wanted to move ahead on. So what do we need to do? And I'm going to just do a few slides on how we can start smashing inequity to get some equity. I worked hard on getting that GIF running. I'm very pleased with it. To start moving ahead. I'll just give you some examples from business. This is straight after Black Lives Matter with Adidas, the kind of things they did. And these are the kind of things that we're looking at, most people are considering in their organizations, but it's those organizations who did the 58% that pushed and pushed on this. They looked at leadership, will grow the leaders to own the game and act as role models, believing in a mindset of continuous learning improvement and looking at performance outcomes related to equity as well. And I wondered what role, for example, us as professionals in ADCAS and ISC and other places were thinking about how can we grow leaders to own the game here? How can we start looking at, when we're looking at recruitment, for example, of heads of careers or heads of employment or whatever we're looking at, or graduate recruiters, how are we acting as role models? How are we putting this as a critical factor? Obviously, we work in universities. Well, what kind of influence have we had? So we work for their HR, our own individual HR teams. But what can we do as a collective? I don't know if you can see this, but this is what McKinsey did, because this is the kind of thing that they might want to consider. McKinsey, I said, this is what they want to do, double our Black leadership. That's what they want to do, and hiring of our Black colleagues in our firm for the next 4 years. So, and then engaging 32,000 in anti-racism and inclusion programs. What are we doing ourselves in this area? This is the kind of thing I think we need to kind of perhaps consider. So in terms of tackling some racism, so just coming through the meat and potatoes of the talk to sort of things that we can have a look at. This is, I think, a useful slide if you want to have a look at this for later, the kind of things that we can consider when we look at racism. I'm going to remove out of here something called unconscious bias. We've come across that quite a lot. My view, and I'm sure you'll agree with me, that we don't necessarily are unconscious about racism. We can only learn that through, our experience at school, our parents, media, society. We're not born with racism. We learn it as we go along. So unconscious kind of suggests that we don't have a role over that, but we do. So we develop those, and we probably have implicit bias, I would say. So we probably develop a personal belief, private beliefs and prejudices that have, and to some extent, do they matter? If you've got a career consultant in an organization working on a particular thing, have a particular belief, but they treat everybody well, knowing that's personal belief they've got to hold back. Does it matter? It's really the interpersonal side when we start expressing racism between individuals. And it really starts stepping up when we have discriminatory treatment policies and practices and organisations. And then definitely when we look at structural, when we look at overall society, public policy and so on. But if we think at institutional and interpersonal level, we could think, have we got enough training for us to feel we're able to work with young Black, male, Muslim, students in the workplace who are coming and looking at particular career areas. Perhaps have we done enough to think, have we worked through our own biases in this area to think, yes, of course you can go into this particular area. I'm sure we all do, but have we done enough? And then discriminatory policies as well. So I've been looking, obviously our work is around skills, I mean all of us, but I've been looking at some of the skilling around what we do. The kind of skills that we're building on, we're looking at leadership skills. Obviously in the business school, we're particularly looking at leadership skills. A lot of these have been built on times and organizations that started post, the large, the Fords, the Unilevers, who sort of described what leadership would look like. And if you're in your mind, if you were to think, who is a leader? What is a senior corporate leader look like? How do they sound? What sort of background do they have? You may have kind of ideas, well, there could be everyone, but many people will still be thinking of particular kind of leadership that we have and a particular kind of leadership skills. Now, my other work is around future work and AI, and I'd suggest actually what we need to do is to rethink the skilling that we need to look at in terms of where people pick the skills up and what kind of skills. Perhaps we should be looking at more relationship skills, creativity, all the things that we read about, but perhaps those are things that we look at measuring as well. There's a really good slide if we're looking at how we start becoming an anti-racist, because I have found this is the most hardest piece of work I've ever done. I think when I was talking to Mike, I talked about some of the experiences I've had now being DNI, nothing as tough as this in any other part of my career. Only the other day, a really kind of explicit thing from a corporate firm who's saying, we're not sure you should talk about race with our senior managers, it will put them off. When I've been asked to talk about equity with them, just talk broadly around innovation, inclusion for innovation, don't mention race because people get put off with it. And I've also had quite insulting things thrown to me as well, because for some, it creates, I think, as said here, there's a fear around it. And one of the other things that we found in the equity effect was that what holds people back from developing an equity policy around race was feeling uncomfortable with terminology, uncomfortable thinking I might sound a racist if I say this. Will I say this as this is off-putting? I know it's Ramadan at the moment, but should I say something about it or should I not say? And actually the 58%, the people that got that kind of group of people, those organizations that pushed ahead, recognized that they're in the fear zone, that this is really uncomfortable. And I have to admit, I find it uncomfortable. I mean, I think I'm going to say the wrong thing. I think I'll say something upsetting. I might say, should I be saying people of color, or is it BME now, or is it BAME? We get caught up in the fear zone of thinking about, I will say the wrong thing. And perhaps what we ought to start pushing forward on is being uncomfortable. Being comfortable being uncomfortable to begin with. And then working through strive to be uncomfortable, educating ourselves, looking at our own privileges, and eventually going to a growth zone of being able to speak out and see it, because I see it a lot more now taking this job. But moving into that kind of area, I think, is quite interesting. But certainly, as I say, it came in the research as well. If we don't do it, we don't see it. Some of the other research found, it's not my research from Thomas High, is that students in our organizations feel more strongly. They did a piece of research about anti-racism, and students feel stronger about standing up to racism than staff in universities. Although many universities are starting to do things. I just took a screenshot of UWS, and they said, they're really looking at changing, call it racism, challenge racist behavior, really kind of pushing things forward, from things like downplaying funding of BAME related projects, marginalizing people, and moving on. The kind of things we can also look at is how we can start changing our recruitment practices. And many, if not nearly all organizations will be looking at race discrimination within recruitment, how they can start doing it and reducing hiring bias, for example, blind hiring, because of data, as I'm sure you're aware, that people, candidates, graduates who send out an ethnic, Black or Asian sounding name are less likely called for interview than white candidates. So there's blind hiring, standardized interview questions, skills-based, which is interesting when we're looking at particular things around strengths and behavioural interviews, but skills-based questioning is one of the things that's come forward. Having a diverse team, of course, when you're recruiting, and then looking at more objective fast-based hiring techniques, which could use AI and so on. Even though we're worried about the bias there may be some data that shows there's less bias. So that's the kind of things we can do. And I also wanted to say, well, that's what we're doing with our students and graduates. What are we doing ourselves? How are we going to enable? Because what we found in the research that the people most discriminated were Black women in organisations. And I kind of feel that when an organisation starts addressing race to the people that are most marginalised, in terms of race, it was Black women, that's when an organisation changes their mindset, because actually what the equity effect found was that when you started addressing race, particularly the most marginalised group, you actually changed the whole organisation's mindset. And that's how the 58% came. It even impacted all other areas of discrimination, because people were saying, right, we're tackling this, and other areas are pulled into it. Gender equity didn't do it the same way, and I did LGBTQ, important as they are, but doing those and not having a strong race equity strategy, you'd have divisions. So organisations that are doing this actually also amazingly had a better commitment around climate as well, which really, so probably more research we're going to have a look at is how an organisational mindset changes, the people within it and what we can do. So the question really for us, and I'm actually posing this specifically to you, what more can we do in our sector to start tackling this? What more can you do is just an individual thing for you to take away if you're wanting to sort of move into this. I'll close with a nice slide from my colleague in Henley, Maddie. Some of you met. This is what we think might be useful, and it's iterative. Again, another business I was working with recently saying, well, we've done Black people, not sure we need to do that again. It's a conversation that's iterative. It's a conversation until we have perhaps no gender pay gap, we don't have race pay gap, we have equal numbers of graduates going into the jobs that we, from all backgrounds, regardless of their background, but based on merit, perhaps then we can perhaps take our foot off the pedal. But until now, maybe what we need to continue is our own self-reflection. This is difficult. I am still struggling with myself, as I say, making sure I think, oh, have I said the right thing here? Understanding our own space, understanding my own privilege in this area as well is important, but I'd say this is the kind of starting point. And then we go into those open conversations. The first conversation I put into around race was just straight after Black Lives Matter to discuss this. And I had a complaint go to the dean that I'd started this conversation about race. Now, that seems weird now because we're having so much around this, but at that time it was jarring for many people. So having open, non-defensive discussion is difficult. How we self-educate, and obviously we can self-educate and we can educate others as well. And then finally, how we start moving our own behavioural change, doing more active allyship, and seeing what we can do, because I'm committed for at least for the next year or so. I've talked to my bosses thinking what we can do is that this is what I want to work on for the foreseeable, the next year or so on this. I'm happy to share everything I've got and do more stages of work, because I can really see how if we start working together around race and fighting racism, we can really achieve a lot more together. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Naeema. Before we dive into some questions, I just wanted to sort of probably say a thank you from the sector for all the work you're doing. Because I know, obviously, having spoken to you at length about some of this stuff, like the personal toll and how actually trying to sort of challenge some of these things, and actually the sort of targeting that comes from it, and the defense, it's more than people being uncomfortable, it's them sort of lashing out and trying to sort of really silence the sort of debate and personally attack people that are trying to sort of raise these really important issues. So I think it's incredibly brave, the work you're doing, and we're really grateful that we have people like you pushing this agenda forward. Clearly we all have a role to play in this, and we all need to be working in it. Can you talk a little bit more about we look at sort of organizations. I think sometimes in our world we're quite comfortable looking at sort of organizations and saying they need to be inclusive for our students, they need to be inclusive for our graduates, and not necessarily looking inwards and saying, actually, as a sector, how inclusive are we? How representative are we? And traditionally, the career sector's very white, very middle class, probably the same really for sort of graduate recruitment. And I'm not going to leave suppliers out of that as well. I think on supplier side, it's fairly similar as well. So what sort of things do you think as a sort of sector of professionals we need to be thinking about to sort of start to address some of these things?
Great, and I'm actually now opening the chat, so I'm having a read through what people have talked about, and there's some quite really interesting and important comments to discuss, that things haven't changed in the sector and what we need to move on. When I started it, you know, I did talk about working, and you know, this is one of the things I started looking at, but it didn't take off, and it's actually been, like most organisations, Black Lives Matter, that really shook people, shook a few people, shook more people, and that kind of had the snowball effect. What we've got to recognise is the equity effect. Is to go back, that having diversity inclusion through equitable practice increases how good we are as an organisation. So it's not an HR function to think, well, let's get some diverse people on the board because we know that it's the thing that we need to do. It's taking it into a much deeper level to think, if you read Matthew Said's work on cognitive diversity, he talks about when you have, if you've got a simple task, or a pure task rather, you probably don't need a wide set of skills on it. But when you have a complex scarf, you need more people that come in, the more people contribute. You'll know this, and everybody on Mike, you'll know this, everybody else on the call will know this. When you have a range of people around the table start contributing, it's really hard to begin with, because you think, oh my God, we're going around into circles, but you're more likely to get a better solution than just you sitting in your kitchen writing things. Not you, Mike, obviously you do great things in your kitchen, but so I think I urge, I'm kind of requesting careers teams to say, what we need to do is to put this as a commitment. You don't say, right, we're recruiting for a new set of people in careers from whatever they are, from employer teams, project teams, career coaches, and think, you know, we'll be open in the recruitment. You make a commitment, like our recruiters are doing, to say, this is important because we've got to start representing the kind of diverse student body. We've got to know this, and not just because it's the right thing to do, but because this it makes us better. It makes us a better service. And if we want to survive through all the changes that will be happening, the government changes that are going to come through for universities, how we show our worth, we've got to prove ourselves as being good. So this is a business argument, really, is get more people. So put it as a strategy to say, we want diverse teams. That's what we're going to do at our next monthly team meeting. How do we do this? Go. That's what we do.
So I'm interested in sort of the parallel, going right back to sort of what Mark was talking about, that there's sometimes a danger that we sort of think employability is something that's done to people or done for people, and we're sort of talking about people in an abstract, when actually it's sort of a complex journey. In terms of sort of equity, how do we involve students in this agenda and get their voice through it? Have you got any sort of, you know, examples or case studies or tips for people that are sort of you know, earlier in
yeah. I mean, I think there's people on the call think, and I just looked at Mary has been doing in Sheffield. That sounds a really good place. Darcy, hello. We've only met on Twitter, and now I'm just sort of seeing her in the background. So and the things that Kulvinder has talked about is that I think it's Kulvinder, when he sometimes works at, I'll just talk my own team. When I have people from different different ethnicities, we find those students tend to go towards those if they're from different backgrounds. Because I used to have it as well, because I used to think, people used to think, oh, she probably understands me a bit more, and you know, can talk to me a bit more. So when you include students in that conversation, and to say, this is what what are you looking for? And part of it is to be listened to. Part of it is to be understood and validated. The other thing I want to say in terms of our approach, if I can, Mike, is around how we do employability, is that employability, and it's in the slides really, is that if we go back, and this might come through from a background when we haven't experienced racism, for example, we might say, in terms of employability, you need to improve your ability, your skills, your work experience, the way you demonstrate that in interview, the kind of things that you need to do. And we'll put you through a practice mock interview and so on and so forth. If students are facing systemic racism through a series of recruitment, we have to do work in a different way. We can't change it, obviously, in our own careers, but we can start acknowledging that and start saying, yes, sure, we can put you through some growth mindset thinking, but actually let's look at something different and how we can start acknowledging that. And that can lift a student group. So if you listen to student groups around employability, around race or other forms of discrimination, it's a different approach to perhaps what we talk about when we talk about students who come from, let's call them traditional backgrounds for now.
Yeah, I think it's massively important that we're honest with students about sort of the inequities in the workplace and in recruitment processes. And I know some great work's going on there, and it's, you know, it is a key topic in the world of sort of ISE, graduate recruitment and development. It hasn't always moved as quickly as possible. You know, we're talking about sort of name blind graduate recruitment. Rebecca always kicks off every time sort of one of the big four announces they're suddenly using name blind recruitment. It's been around for 25 years. The vast majority of employers still aren't utilising it, and there's too many companies sort of wanting to sort of make a difference, but not really wanting to sort of structurally change how they recruit and develop people, and still going to the same institutions where there's the same type of students, all that sort of stuff. And that representation is not always involved as well. So
it's skilling as well. I think we did, Paul, there's just like tangent, but we're looking at the cricket, we looked at how we performed in the Olympics in terms of rowing. I'm just giving some examples that when we recruit, just like, you know, to make it a little, you know, so we can go, oh yeah, if we're recruiting from a small group of people, so rowing, for example, British rowing, recruiting from people where you can row, which tends to come from public schools where they've got the ability, you're only recruiting from that pool, and sure, you can give them lots of investment for them to come better, but if you're widening it, you're bound to get a group of people who can start performing really well.
I've got a couple more questions from the chat. Matthias, good old Matthias Feist, is always got insightful questions to ask. So, is there research into graduates moving into the UK and how are they affected? So he's talking in the context of, he works with a lot of African coders and developers, and it's you know, frustrating how difficult it is to place them given the sort of skills gaps, and you know, even for remote roles he's talking about as well.
Yeah, and I saw Mary's, there's lots of things that I only very quickly, Matthias, hello as well, yo, is said to everybody, is very Matthias like. So there's some stuff yesterday, and I was talking to a company around this who are really good, and they said what they want to start doing is for example, how they described it is that you go to universities or businesses and say, you look at people who are employed who are from Black and ethnic minorities, and often they'll be in junior posts, cleaning, catering, and so on. And they described recruiting people from Africa and Asia in back office work similarly, or recruiting people who come to the UK to do that as well. So they were saying what they have to, the organizational mindset has to change to say these people have such a wide range of skills and abilities, and we have to also train them, you know, and think differently how we can employ these people because they're super talented, but it's a mindset as well.
Yeah. Okay. So Kulvinder's asking, how do we support those from a BME background to access senior roles within careers service? So there's little reflection in careers versus coming out of the real world.
Yeah, I don't know if any ACASI senior folks are here. I'm sure you're the man with the key to seniority everywhere. So turn this key and say, why don't you do what organisations are doing? Why don't you offer championing? I think the NHS at the moment are doing work experience, the kind of things. I mean, if anybody knows about careers, should it not be us? So what do we say to students when we say, well, they want to get in to become a barrister, but it's really tough? You go, well, have you thought about, these are the kind of skills you need to develop. This is the kind of work experience you need to do. This is the kind of networking you need to do. This is the kind of mentoring schemes you might want to join. They should also be in our sector as well. They should be set up for people to do that, and not be thought of as how we ought to do this because it's, you know, we should do things from just a social justice perspective, or what's the right thing, to recognise this makes graduate career development work better.
So, and this is just something that occurred to me as you were sort of speaking, and I know this is clearly a global issue, but is there something uniquely Britishness about sort of that sort of uncomfortable, that not wanting to sort of, you know, be uncomfortable and not wanting to sort of, you know, challenge a thing or offend anyone, that sort of holds back the debate at all?
No, it's not at all just British, obviously, what you say. And actually, if I look at, and I just did a short piece in Germany around race as well, where you actually can't get race data because of the Second World War, obviously, and it's quite, people are very reluctant to put, you know, it's almost against the law to do that because of what happened, you know, with the history of the Holocaust and so on. It's very difficult to look at race data because it actually always like the opposite. But people are kind of struggling to say, well, we experience racism now, how do we tackle it? So Europe, we're one of the lowest of racism, so it's actually not, I think, and we do feel uncomfortable. We can perhaps take some pride that things have progressed, but racism, sometimes I think we all know this, everybody on the call know this better than anyone. Sorry, I'm just reading names, a comment there. So we all know racism, not just me. It's like this history of racism has been at least with us for 400 years. So we all know it. It just is, I think, the big uncomfortable one. So if we all, you know, make a pledge, everyone on the call, to say 132 people, and us think, actually, what I'll do is be a little more comfortable about being uncomfortable, read up a bit more about it, start getting the whole kind of like, why I'm no longer, you know, let's do that kind of stuff, and have a kind of vibe around it, have a chat and talk to colleagues and start thinking, I'll start going into that. The data isn't, the data name is UK businesses. I'm not, I didn't look at, this isn't UK businesses, not students. This is what might want me to look at the business side of it.
Okay, thank you so much, Naeema. It's been a privilege to have you sharing your work, and yeah, we really appreciate your insight, and it's given us huge amount of food for thought, and it's something we all need to educate ourselves about, and yeah, do more basically. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much. It's been a fantastic opportunity,
and I look forward to catching up soon.
Yes, and thank you for your work as well. Amazing stuff.
Okay, cheers, Naeema. So